Hi guys, and welcome to today's session. We're going to be carrying on with this portrait sculpture I'm actually working from. So rather than it being specifically a photo portrait, this is a piece of classical sculpture, which, as I spoke a little bit about last week, if you watched that video, they can make for really good subjects if you're trying to learn about portrait drawing. And that's just because the forms are already sort of developed somewhat for you. But it's not quite the same as copying like a painting or a drawing, which is already in a 2D form. The sculpture is kind of inherently, obviously, a 3D thing that you're copying. So I'm going to begin this session just making some tweaks to a few of the shapes here and there that we sort of placed last week. So at the moment I'm just tweaking the eyes a little bit. When I was looking at this in my studio over the last week, it just kind of, I tend to leave things sitting around that I've been working on and sort of absent-mindedly look at them in between doing other things, because I find it a good way to kind of pick up on things that maybe seem a little bit off without it being kind of in the context of actually doing the drawing like I am now. And one of the things that stood out to me was I could do with just changing the placement of the eyes a little bit, because everything else has a tilt to it, a slight tilt, so you can sort of see the nose, the mouth, the forehead. And the eyes do have a slight tilt, but they feel a little bit flatter to me. And tilt is really important with a portrait. Talked a lot about it in previous videos as well. It's always something that I kind of really emphasize whenever I'm doing a portrait. So I'm just going in and correcting the tilt and making sure that this right eye is a little bit higher up than I already had it. Just lifting it somewhat. In the process of that, just changing a few of the other eye shapes. So, dropped my eraser. It's covered in dog fur. The downsides of having multiple pets. I have access to your studio. So, we're just going to see how much I can now lift up. We've got, I figure out where the shadow of the brow is going to go. So it's gonna place that about here. And I think probably need to go a little bit higher, so I'm just going to lift all of this stuff somewhat, because otherwise I'm just not going to get enough space to lift the eyelid. If I lifted the eyelid without kind of moving all this stuff up a little bit further, it's just going to cram everything in and this shape's going to feel too small. So this is the stage where you want to make these sorts of changes, these sorts of decisions, because you can see it's pretty easy to shift stuff around. So let's lift this bottom of the eyelid up a little bit. Because the lid itself is going to need a little bit of thickness. And you can see I need to, if you look at the reference a bit on the right, I just need that more space for the fold of skin which sits between the lid and the sort of brow proper. So to have that much space here, I need to again push up a little bit further, push all this stuff up. And it probably seems like a kind of minor little thing to be doing, but it really does make a difference. I'm gonna just pull this brow up a little bit as well. So now the eyes actually feel a lot more locked into a good position. I mean, if you went back to the beginning of the video, you'd be able to see how much of a change that's made actually. But yeah, they feel a lot better, a lot more locked in now. And what I want to do is switch to a slightly different type of pencil. I'm going to be switching to a mechanical, still using a B lead, and I'm going to go in and just, particularly around the eyes, we're going to now start doing a little bit of rendering almost. So not rendering in the lights, but we're going to be starting to develop these shadow forms further. So that means going into the shadows and where they need to be darker, making them darker. So where the shadow's kind of going up and meeting the light, it goes darker. It's called the bedbug line, or sometimes the Terminator, both quite silly names. You've probably heard me talk about them before in other videos. And then it gets a little bit lighter as it transitions down. That's because there's light bouncing up from the top of the cheek, filling that shadow somewhat. So I just went in and erased the shadow slightly. So there's just a little bit more light in it, using the eraser rolled up into a very fine point to do that. I'm starting to creep a little bit into some of the halftones, but not really heavily go into what's going on in the halftones. Just a little bit of elaboration on the wrinkles underneath his eye as well. You can see it makes quite a change, that work in the shadows. Yeah, not pulling much more than that across into the halftones just yet. Today's going to be mostly just figuring out these shadow shapes. We've already spent sort of half a normal session length on just this left-hand eye alone. But really there's not, huge numbers of shadows across this piece. There's stuff going on in the eyes. So we'll start moving across this right-hand eye now. A little bit of stuff going across on that left-hand side where the hair is. And then down in the nose and mouth area. So that's just what we're going to be focusing on today. That's what's important. And here and there we're pulling out a little bit into the halftones, but not kind of forcing that, not directly working on the halftones. The halftones are those parts of the drawing that are, well, between the lightest part of the drawing, which are going to be the highlights, and the shadows. So at the moment, work on the shadows. Shadows are basically the parts of the drawing that just don't receive direct light. Halftones are receiving direct light, but they're not receiving all of the direct light. For instance, through that little section there, I'm pulling slightly out of the halftone, but not enormously. Going back and working more in the shadow now. So things are in shadow or not receiving direct light usually for two reasons. They're either a form shadow, so something like where the brow is wrapping around down, cutting back on itself. The form itself just can't receive any direct light there. Some places are more cast shadows, so this part of the shadow that's sort of wrapping around and fading out on the lid, the eyelid is there because the nose is casting a little bit of a shadow across some of these forms. So the nose form is blocking light from reaching the lid form, essentially. And you get that a lot in different parts of any drawing, any subject. And on the channel there are quite a number of videos that go over that sort of stuff, so if you're not so confident on it, feel free to check them out. If you go into our list of videos and just sort of search for form, you'll find a few videos that I've made that cover really useful basic principles of form, super important for sort of doing realistic portraits or these sorts of drawings generally. So I'm just going to pull the right hand side of the face in a tad. After making those changes. To the eyes, it sort of necessitated a few little knock-on changes to the rest of the face, but again, everything's pretty simple, so it's easy to do these changes. It just gets harder when everything's sort of the level I'm getting the eyes up to now. If I wanted to make changes to them, it's not impossible, and I'd still recommend it if something's genuinely wrong. But it's better to kind of, when things are simple lines like this, that's the point where you want to be making changes and shifting stuff around. So yeah, that seems pretty good, I think, for that eye. We don't have much of a shadow. We've got like a little bit of a shadow that's kind of curling around, coming out of this hair slightly, so we can pop that in. Same thing, another kind of curl here that's sort of wrapping out of shadow. So a few little shadows around the place here that we can pop in before I move down to the bottom. Just putting a few kind of simple shapes into shadow shapes, roughly placing them into the rest of the head. But as much as possible, keeping the lighter part of the drawing fairly light. So moving down to the nose now, one of the main things going on in the nose is a distinction between the nostril, which is more of an occlusion shadow. So that's shadow where there's just really no light bouncing around. And the underside of the nose itself, rather than the nostril, which is receiving quite a bit of reflected light up into the tip of it. So you can see very quickly, just by doing this, putting these darker tones in for the occlusion shadow, I've got a sense of that, how that light is bouncing up. It's not, you can see it's not very hard to do that actually. So we just had that really basic shadow in, and I've just put the darks in. This is what I mean about sort of the variations in the darks and how they tell you a lot. So that's pretty good for the nose for the time being. We'll be elaborating it in future sessions, because this is it's going to be a fairly sustained little drawing. It's not going to be rushed. Some of the other recent portrait drawing lessons were a little bit more sort of sketching based. They're kind of inherently meant to be quicker little exercises, but this isn't. This is going to be a longer, more precise process, so we're taking our time with it. So I'm going to a little bit looser down in this beard. Just because we want to kind of maintain a focal point a bit more around the face, so we can kind of start to loosen off slightly. And get a bit further down the drawing. But we'll put a little bit of a differentiation between top of the little goatee and some reflected light bouncing down into it. But that might be something, if we do elaborate, we elaborate down the line. Yeah, that's looking all right, I think, for this stage. So we've got our primary shadows blocked in. It has a lot more punch to it now. There's a lot of probably smaller shadows and halftones we're going to be adding as the piece progresses, but this is a good starting point for us to be at. So yeah, I'll stop there. Lift my pencil off the paper. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. If you want to see other videos by myself and other tutors, you can follow us. Any ones that are new coming up, and you can look through the archive, like I mentioned, for stuff to do with form, if you want to kind of go over form principles. And if you want to see the sorts of paid qualifications we offer at the school, you can click the link through to our website and check that stuff out too. So yeah, that's it for today, and I'll see you guys soon.